Today, let's dive into what happened on Friday with the Clarity Act. Did we get rug pulled? Well, we've got a special guest that's going to break it all down for you guys. You do not want to miss this show. You've probably heard me mention Uphold before, and there's a reason I keep talking about them. Uphold makes it incredibly easy to bridge the gap between your portfolio and the real world. This has not been done before. Their Uphold debit card is the best example of that. It lets you spend your crypto or your cash anywhere Visa is accepted, all while earning 4% back in XRP on every purchase. It's the easiest way to stack rewards on your daily spending. Download the Uphold app for more and get started. Let's just get right into it. I want to bring on Lindsay Fraser, who is the Chief Policy Officer over at the Blockchain Association. Lindsay, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
First of all, kudos to the work you guys are doing. Glad to see, of course, the efforts when it comes to lobbying for this industry right now. Lindsay, I want to go to something here real quick because we're going to ask a lot of questions about Friday, get into that. But right now, we have a Clarity final deadline that is looming. Now, this looks like it's a long time, guys, but this is not. When you really look at the calendar, the congressional calendar, you're knocking off day after day because of weekends. They don't work on a Monday. And then before you know it, we're down to like less than 10 days. So this is a very critical week this week. What are your odds right now of this potentially passing?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm continuing to stay optimistic. I think there's been a lot of progress in the last couple days even. So, what, I'm gonna put it at 60%, which is far
Wow.
beyond what Polymarket has it
Yeah,
at.
yeah.
But
I was just looking at Polymarket. It was 31%. I like your number, but now you got to back that up. Why?
Yeah, so I think, and I know we'll get into it a little bit more, but we were expecting the text to be released on Friday. I actually think that if the text had been released on Friday, it would have been a version of the text that would have only had Republican support. And I know right now, as up to date as during the day today, there are continued meetings going on around the ethics provision, which is
Okay.
obviously a gating issue to get any Democratic support. So I actually think the longer we wait until text release, although obviously not too long, it increases the chances of the text that's released being bipartisan in manner, which obviously makes then the path to the actual floor vote all the easier.
Yeah. All right. So let me get this straight. You think them missing the Friday intended release might be a good thing?
Yeah, I think that if the meeting that happened last Thursday at the White House only had Republicans in the meeting.
Yeah.
And so, regardless of the outcome of that meeting, that solution needed to be socialized with Democrats, and I don't think it was
Mhm.
going to happen by midday Friday. And so I know that there's been some back and forth over the weekend. There's a few meetings today. And I also think, the Friday deadline was always aspirational. And obviously, Legislative Council needs to get involved in dotting the I's and crossing the T's when it comes
Mhm.
to adding in those last provisions.
Right.
So yeah, I actually think if we see the text, tomorrow, Wednesday, I think honestly it'll probably be in a better place than it would have been had it been released on
All right.
Friday.
So tomorrow, Wednesday, potentially for the text, would that still put this in the purview of a operational vote this week?
I think if the text is released tomorrow, we could potentially see a vote this week. I think likely if it's released Wednesday or beyond, it would probably slip until early next week. I'm
Okay.
also not going to completely write off that it could be released this evening. I do think that there are still kind of some meetings going on later this afternoon, so I would be surprised, but never say never.
Yeah.
They love to do a midnight text release, so
Oh, yeah.
still see it later tonight.
Do they ever? Do they? But usually when they do those midnight releases, it's usually because there's something in there they don't want to talk about. That's always my fear.
Yeah, I think sometimes, but also it is just like the nature of what's going to be like a 700-page bill is that
Yeah.
I think it always takes them longer than they think to actually get it out publicly. And so even with positive drafts we've seen over the past year, we've seen the midnight 1 a.m. release, much to our
Oh,
chagrin.
yeah. Potential tax release. How far do you think we are from getting 60 votes? I think we're at around 53 right now. And that's if McConnell can still stay in the game here. I mean, he's been hospitalized. We've talked, there's been kind of an MIA situation with him. He's an important vote, a very strategic, important vote. How close are we to 60?
Yeah, so I think in the most recent statement that we saw from his staff, he said that he's still taking time to recover. So, and we ideally would like to see a vote later this week, at the latest, I think early next week.
Yeah.
So I think we're trying to do the math as if he won't be back to for a vote. And I also think, there are some Republicans who didn't vote for the Genius Act that we all need to spend some more time on. So we are ideally looking for, I think, around 10 Democrats at
Uh-huh.
the least to feel comfortable about hitting that 60 vote threshold. Obviously, ethics is the gating issue here, but I think, like let's say that the ethics solution is reached and it gets to a place where Democrats feel comfortable supporting the bill. I think we're actually very close. We've had very positive meetings with, Democratic offices over the
Right.
past week. I think people are becoming more comfortable with the DeFi related provisions. And so it really is going to end up kind of landing on where this ethics deal
Exactly. Yeah.
falls. Yeah.
Okay. So you had Trump supposedly having a meeting last week around this very topic, and that was ethics. I thought maybe there was going to be some sort of provision or some sort of compromise between the president and the administration and what's happening with the Democrats. Do you think that's still a possibility that that is happening?
Yeah, I think it's still a possibility. I think last Thursday, there's been a lot of meetings going around around the ethics provision with White House counsel, with other people who have been working on these issues at the White House and obviously on the Hill. I think last Thursday was really kind of one of the first opportunities to brief the president
Hmm.
directly himself. And so I imagine there will be follow-on conversations as the Democrats get more and more involved in the discussions. But I really think we're getting close to the end, finding a solution here. And I think we'll hear in the next couple of days exactly what the contours of that deal will look like.
So we've been kind of pointing to the issue of the banks throwing these last minute hurdles in. It's their game. It's the playbook they've been running. What are you guys anticipating this week? Because I'm expecting something to drop today or tomorrow from the banks. What do you guys think?
Yeah, well, we definitely have seen their continued involvement, whether it be directly through talking about Section 404, so the stablecoins reward section, or through, I think, getting some other groups activated.
Yeah.
Um, it was, I believe it was either early last week or late the week before, but the American Bankers Association put out another letter
Hmm.
referencing their requested changes on Section 404. And we hear in our Hill meetings that offices are still continuing to hear from all of the relevant bank trade associations here in DC trying to reopen 404. But I mean, I also think they have, decades and decades of lobbying experience and political capital, over the crypto industry, who's still relatively new. And so I think like when we expect that when the bill gets put up to a floor vote, to continue to hear from them even more intensely, as well from other interest groups that
Yeah.
I think are getting increasingly aligned with them, per their pushing.
Do you think people are really supporting this on the bankers side of things? Because you've got in the beginning, it was kind of like, hey, this is going to be a lot flight of capital. There's been many things, reports, including research. The regional banks actually might end up better off because they might be able to compete now with the big guys. Do you think they have anybody left to really support them through this final leg?
I think they'll continue to try to find those people. I mean, like you said, the community banks, the regional banks, have, been kind of inspired to speak up on this issue against kind of the research we've seen. Like you noted, the Council of Economic Advisors from the White
Right.
House
Yeah.
found that the impact on deposits at banks is going to be very, very
Hmm.
minimal.
Hmm.
So, we have tons of research that support that this is not a true, fear. And at the same time, we see these big banks announcing every other day new partnerships with
Yeah.
different companies across
Innovation.
the industry.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, like to us, like this feels more like a
Mm,
stall tactic than anything else because, they understand, I think, that this is the future of where finance is heading, and they want time to get, their internal infrastructure up to
okay.
speed to be able to compete. But yeah, I'm sure they will continue to interact and inspire the community banks and regional banks to uh, to be loud about this. But I think to your point, this actually benefits both of those constituencies.
That's a big one. One other area that we see a lot, well, specifically to what happened in the Genius Act, was the barrage of amendments that came in on the floor from none other than Senator Warren. You know she's going to do this. It's going to happen. You've got to have everybody prepared in the industry to fight against God knows what. Um, are we ready for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the industry, as well as all of the Democrats who have been working on this issue in an incredibly bipartisan manner, um, are prepared for those types of amendments. I think that it's always interesting to me because for someone who is, skeptical of the industry like Senator Warren is, you would think that that would make them very supportive of the bill because it
Yeah.
puts guardrails in place versus the continued status quo of having unclear regulations.
Hmm.
And so I do think we're prepared, and like this is the culmination of years and years of education on Capitol Hill. And so I do think the offices who have really earnestly come to the table to put together this amazingly bipartisan product will understand, when we have amendments come into play that, we've spent the better half of a year specifically on this iteration of the bill, but this is years and years of work.
Yeah.
And I think they would understand why a lot of the amendments that we assume to be proposed by Senator Warren would unravel that and, in fact, not make the industry, safer, more competitive. So I think we are prepared for that.
I'm beginning to think that this has all been a tactic to essentially elicit more campaign funding. And this is a concern that I have about DC is they continue to press and press and press. If they don't get it done before we see midterms, how much of an impact do you think that's going to have on a lot of these lobbies supporting many of these Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting if we don't have at least the Senate product put up to a vote on the floor. I think, as I know you all know, and I'm sure the audience knows, I think it's unlikely that Clarity or any other kind of meaningful digital asset legislation would pass in a lame duck period. And then depending on the outcome of the election,
Right.
likely we'll have to wait at least what another Congress, potentially even longer.
Mm.
And so, I think our message has been to Republicans, and, to both sides of the aisle, like get this bill to the floor. This has been the product of years of work. The House did an amazing job. It was an incredibly bipartisan vote. Let's get the bill to the floor to, you know, ha like push this forward and see
Mhm.
where people really land on this issue. And then, I'll defer to my colleagues who work on the political side in terms of the impact on elections and campaign spending. But I do think it's really important to we in order to move this forward and kind of understand where we are in the issue, we do need a vote to happen.
Now we're seeing Genius Act a year later in terms of these deadlines for stablecoin rules. And if you look at that, and a couple of things in this article that I thought was interesting, this was talking about the Federal Reserve, OCC, FDIC, and the Treasury had all had a seat at the table, but none of them delivered a finished product. So, with all that being done, it's a year later. Does that mean that you aren't completely sure that if it does make it to the Senate floor, that it could even go through?
No, I feel confident that if the bill makes it through the Senate floor, we will I think it'll be able to get through the House relatively quickly into the president's desk. I think that's really the gating issue
Yeah.
here is getting to that 60 on the floor. And it's just a question of, will
Is
there be an agreement in principle to have 60 votes before it gets scheduled to get on the floor? Or do they
okay.
just put it on the floor and kind of see what happens?
Man, this is getting really close. What about, there's a couple other things that are happening right now. One is, of course, the Federal Reserve. They're rolling out their rulemaking here for stablecoin issuers. This is concerning to me because now these are rulemaking elements that could happen. And first thing is they're talking about customer identification. That's right, guys. You're seeing this article correctly. This is Kevin Warsh. He abstained on this situation. So then you have Michael Barr, who supported the proposal, but said he had already had concerns about where Genius Act goes from, that it wasn't going far enough. So what do you guys think about this now that we're seeing actual rulemaking coming out?
Yeah, so we have responded, I think, to every single Genius Act implementation notice of proposed rulemaking. We are
Hmm.
working on a response to this proposed rule now. Obviously, it's super important to the Blockchain Association and to our members
Yes.
that we are not, blanket applying BSA reporting obligations to technology where there's a lack of intermediaries. We've been working hard on our responses to these proposed rulemakings and do find it concerning and are, worried about when we're talking about illicit finance risks in secondary market transactions. We are worried about how that works with,
Yeah.
decentralized finance protocols. And we spent a lot of time in our responses talking about that. But we have been working closely with our members to help put together responses to ensure that, the Genius Act talks about digital asset service providers. Those are treated as financial institutions where we have these obligations, but
Right.
making sure that some of these obligations that include the collection of personally identifiable information do not stretch beyond that DAS definition into different parts of the crypto ecosystem that could include DeFi.
Well, it should only be if the court has issued some sort of order when there is a question if there's illicit finance going on. I mean, this is just like anything else that is AML and what we're dealing with right now on the bank secrecy side of things. Why is there more stringency when it comes into something like this, which is basically just a new way to do the same thing we've always done?
Yeah, no, like our question is like the deeper question, which we're always pushing back on is, the default is just to apply these BSA reporting obligations onto these intermediaries. And I feel like we still yet haven't taken a step back to look at like, does that information collection actually work when it
Yeah.
comes to combating illicit
Yeah.
activity? And actually, with this technology, are there ways to combat illicit activities in a way that's actually better and more efficient and also
Mhm.
requires less personally identifiable information? I think yes. So that's always part of our argument as well.
All right. So there's another thing that's starting to concern me, and that is Trump's most recent pick or nominee, I should say, to serve as director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is Brian Johnson. This is, when we dive in to him, a very pro-bank support situation. I don't know. Is this a good thing? Because this looks to me like Trump knows this guy is pro-bank, and this is going directly at the core of what everybody is wanting, and that is financial freedom away from the big banks. So we've got the opportunity to do something else. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think honestly, my biggest fear with these recent nominations across the board is the fact that it is going to start eating into floor time on the Senate floor.
Yes.
So we have Jay Clayton, now we have Brian Johnson, we have the
Hmm.
Attorney General. I think across the board, those all need to go to a vote at some
Hmm.
point soon. And so how does that impact the sequencing of the Clarity Act? That is really like I think on top of the substance, in terms of Mr. Johnson being the potential director of the CFPB. I think in the near term, I'm honestly more nervous about how these various nominations play into eating up the
Yeah.
very little available Senate floor time.
Let me ask you this, just as a scenario, because I don't know enough about policy when it comes to getting these things through. Let's just say that, the text comes in and it's workable, okay? And it gets to the House. The House says, yeah, okay, we can workable, but we run out of time. We just literally run out of time on workable days in which the Senate could actually vote on it. What is the process on that when you have a House that's actually said, yeah, and a Senate that seems to have agreed to something in principle? What happens then?
Yeah, so I do think like we have the Senate is still in session for a few more weeks. The issue now is that the House leaves for August recess actually at the end of this week.
Yep.
So if the Senate passed it this week or next week, it won't get to the House until September, unless Mike Johnson decides to keep people in
Do an
town.
extra.
But
Yeah, that's what I
I
was
don't.
thinking. Did they just hold them over?
They could. I think that there's a lot of like in district events, people are campaigning. There's some
Yeah.
hotels. I think it's unlikely he would keep them. So if we pass, that's also the danger now that we're likely not going to get it done in time for it to get immediately sent over to the House and
Okay.
put forward. Is that then, if the Senate passes it off the floor, let's say later this week, early next week, it's just going to be sitting out there for a
Yeah,
month before the House can take it up. And that's
exactly.
obviously scary for a bill to be out there for that long.
Not good.
For the
That's when,
banks, yeah,
think
for other
long,
people.
think wrong. Yeah, no good.
Well, that's why it's so important that it gets to the Senate floor before the August recess, because then it's through the Senate. So when the House comes back, they just need to green stamp it and then it'll go to the president. I think the biggest fear is that if we don't have the vote on the Senate floor ahead of August, then to your point, all of these senators who I think are in a good place right now, they go home to their districts, they're hearing
Yeah.
from their people, they're hearing from the banks, et cetera. I think that leaves us in a really, really hard spot in the Senate in September, which is why we've said we think it's necessary for the bill to get a vote on the Senate floor before the August recess. Otherwise, honestly, my percentage goes from 60 down very close to zero.
Ooh, did you hear that, guys? Very close to zero coming from the Blockchain Association. That's the kind of concern. That's the urgency that we've got out there. So hopefully you are talking to your lawmakers out there in your own districts to kind of continue to push, at least from the consumer side, that we want to get something done here. Listen, this has been great, Lindsay. We're going to have you back on, hopefully in better times where we're actually dealing with new policy going forward. And we got all kinds of good things to talk about. But thanks for coming in today. We appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
If you like this video, hit like and subscribe, drop a comment down below, and also join our free private member group. The link is in the description.